Dun dun.
Have you guys ever heard of the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders?
No.
So in 1977, there was this camp in Oklahoma called Camp Scott. It was the first day of camp for the summer, and there was 3 little girls. This is the first night of camp that were murdered. 8-year-old Lori Lee Farmer, 9-year-old Michelle Heather Goose, and 10-year-old Doris Denise Miller. They were in tent number 8 in the Kalama unit, and they were like approximately 80 yards from the nearest counselor. And these tents were kind of like cabins. Like they had like a wooden floor, like wood platforms. They had a big, large like opening, so anyone could really come in or out. But they were pretty big. So there were supposed to be 4 girls in the tent that night, but because of a scheduling error, the 4th girl wasn't there yet, and there was only 3 of them. So around that night, they went back into the tents at night to go to bed. They were writing letters home. It was a rainy night, and at around 1:30, a counselor named Carla White was awakened by girls in tent 6 laughing. So her and another counselor went over to tell them to quiet down. And when she woke up, she heard a low guttural sound coming from the woods. And when she would shine her flashlight into the tree line, it would stop. So around that same time, a camper in tent 7 saw a light coming towards their tent, but as soon as they got there, a man appeared and he walked away. So no one said anything about any of these things or did anything about any of these things. And there was even people even heard voices screaming, people screaming for their moms, but no one checked it out or saw anything after that until 6 a.m. when Carla woke up at 6 to shower, so she could shower before all the campers woke up. And when she left her tent, she saw 3 sleeping bags outside of the tent. And 2 of them were closed and 1 of them was open, and inside were the bodies of the 3 girls.
I'm confused why, if counselors heard the screamings, why no one went and checked it out.
Yeah, that feels very important and just the job of a counselor to go check on things around camp.
Yeah, if you're hearing someone screaming for their mom in low guttural moans, how do you not go check that out?
Especially
Exactly.
if there have already been they were already awake by close enough to the time. They probably weren't even asleep yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they were up yelling at kids to go to bed, and they they heard it. They heard the noises coming from the trees.
Yeah.
I wonder if in years counselor Carla Wilhite has faced backlash, or
I don't know.
Probably.
people were like, why didn't you go check on that?
Yeah.
So the news of these murders spread very quickly. By 10 a.m., Camp Scott was evacuated, thus beginning the investigation. The Mays County Sheriff was Glenn Pete Weaver, and the district attorney was Sid Wise. When investigators arrived, the bodies were found about 150 yards from the tent in the side of the trail, and the trail was tucked into the furthest part of Camp Scott. And the main gate and back gate were all locked, and they weren't a hard obstacle. There was no fence around the camp. The initial evidence found was duct tape used on the girls and near their bodies, and they later discovered a roll of duct tape. Near the bodies of the girls, there was duct tape, women's eyeglasses, an eyeglass case, and a flashlight. On June 16th, the medical examiner said that the girls were not raped, but they were molested.
And the medical examiner's office never even released a cause of death, really,
Yeah.
or officially.
I think they only just say beaten to death.
Yeah.
Which that's not really
Yeah, but there's
No.
also not a murder weapon. There's not a confirmed, a murder
No.
weapon. So, just to clarify, we're, really far back in the camp.
Yeah.
Yeah, by the exit gates.
Yes.
The flashlight that was already discovered had been manipulated to only show a small beam of light. And how they did this, well, another thing they did to the flashlight was they stuffed a Tulsa World newspaper into it to stop the batteries from making noise. When investigators entered the tent, there was blood found on the tent flap, the floor, the mattress, and the tent was pretty broken. But something that was never investigated was there was a shoe print found in the blood on the floor, which no one ever investigated because that seems like a key piece of evidence.
I agree.
Yeah,
That would be very
like
important.
The forensics, like the measurements, they could have like.
I could have done something
And you
with it.
can kind of tell if it was like a boot or like a tennis shoe or
Yeah.
if it was like a woman's or a man's.
Right.
Yeah.
Something unusual about it was that there was no blood found on the right side of the tent, which was Doris's side of the tent. So a belief that some people have is that she was not killed in the tent, that she was walked somewhere else and then killed.
Was
But-
it to where they found the bodies?
That's what it is to believe to be, is that she walked there and then she was killed.
I don't know. That feels a little.
Just out in
Little
the
sketchy.
open. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
When
mean,
people
like,
were awake.
if you have someone behind you, like carrying two bodies,
Yeah.
and you're like walking out in front of him when the only thing they found nearby was like a crowbar,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
how do you
And
not
just, like,
maybe
out
just
in the
take off or
open.
scream like?
Right.
And out in the open like that, like there was people awake. Like there
Yeah.
was, yeah.
No way anyone, not everyone in that camp was asleep.
And
Yeah.
maybe he did use the duct tape, taped her mouth, made her walk. I don't know.
Yeah, but if her hands are free, you can just.
Yeah.
If you couldn't see me, I'd rip the tape off.
So, different evidence would lead investigators to a different location, one of them being Schroff Ranch, owned by Jack Schroff a mile from the camp. Schroff said food, beer, tape, and rope was all stolen from him, and the rope he said was stolen was very similar to the ones near the bodies.
That's very convenient for him.
Yeah, like everything you used to
Right.
find was stolen from you.
Stolen
Okay.
from
And how does
Especially
someone just
because-
break in your house and steal all that random stuff and you wouldn't like catch them?
He didn't have a grocery list when he broke in, dude.
And there were actually beer bottles found outside like the perimeter of the camp, so that seems a little sketchy. Early days of the investigation, the cops would search the caves surrounding Camp Scott. While searching the caves, investigators found a Tulsa World newspaper, photographs of two women, groceries, and duct tape matching the kind found on the girls. There was a note written on the inside of this cave that said, "The killer was here, bye-bye fools."
Wow.
So I would assume that is direct at the police.
I would assume.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you're not gonna catch me.
Right.
Yeah, he thinks he's like cocky.
Sheriff began to suspect someone, like he had an idea of who the murderer was. So that started to narrow down to Gene Leroy Hart.
Isn't it because he developed the photos while he was serving time, so when they found him in the caves?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was what led the sheriff to kind of make his hypothesis.
Now, Gene Leroy Hart was born in Locust Grove, Oklahoma, which was close to the camp. He was a good local football player. Everyone knew his name. He wasn't, like, the police knew who he was. He had been in trouble before. And in June of 1966, when he graduated from high school, that is when he kind of started his life of crime. So later, maybe like the late 60s, he abducts two pregnant women from a Tulsa nightclub parking lot, where he drives them out to a field in Mays County, which is really close to the camp.
Okay.
And that is where he would then brutally rape and sodomize both of these pregnant women and steal their glasses, tie them to a tree, and leave them for dead. The two women did survive, and he was arrested, charged, and convicted of the crime. But later, like a year, he was released on parole.
He was released
Yeah.
after
After
all
a
that.
year, that is
Yeah.
insane.
Now, it's imperative in the investigation about him, he would always steal his eyeglasses from his victims because he had really bad eyesight.
He
Could've
couldn't
just-
go buy his own glasses.
Yeah, just get glasses.
And then an Oklahoma State Bureau investigator, Marty, said that he would just steal glasses wherever he went. And so when he's out on parole, he starts burglarizing houses. And so the first 3 of the burglaries he did, he wasn't caught for until his 4th burglary, where he broke into a Tulsa police officer's home.
Oh, that's very
It's a
smart.
good way to get caught.
A
Yeah.
police officer. And so then he was convicted of all 4 counts of burglary when he was obviously caught by the police officer.
Couldn't choose another house. No, it seems like the only thing that man can do is like escape
He doesn't
prison.
look in the
Yeah.
garage. Maybe just look for the police car first. Didn't they
Yeah.
take him home back then? So, and then he's convicted on 4 counts of this burglary, and because he was on parole for rape and kidnapping, he is sentenced to 90 years of consecutive prison time, which also could be 350 years. But in 1973, after a hearing at the Mays County Court, he escaped. But don't worry, that time he was swiftly caught and returned. Now, just a few months later, they caught him once again. Actually, they didn't catch him. He got away from the police. They didn't handcuff him to someone at that point. Like, he's clearly slippery.
You think you'd take extra precautions?
And then it would take them 6 whole years just to track this guy down again.
Wow.
Oh, goodness.
And so before this all happened, before the girls were murdered at Camp Scott, he had broken out of prison. And now that he was Sheriff Weaver's #1 main suspect, the investigation looking for him really intensified, which is confusing because you weren't intensely looking for a rapist and murderer
Right,
after he breaks
Yeah.
out of your
It's a
prison.
career criminal.
More than
Yeah.
once.
I think you'd
And
want him back.
I think it was about maybe 4 years after he had escaped is when this was.
Wow.
So they just really let him out. And so, but then throughout the police investigation, they just continuously contradict each other. Sheriff Weaver would come out and say he did have the murder weapon, and then the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigators would say, we have no idea what he's talking about. We know nothing of the murder weapon. So that they were not on the same page. They were
Yeah.
barely in the same library.
That's horrible for an investigation.
Yeah, not being on the same page.
Then there was also a rumor during the investigation that a medicine man had cursed the Wonder Dogs, the police search dogs, also referred to as the Wonder Dogs. Which it sounds pretty clear that this happened because it's not a coincidence that not 1, but 2 of the 3 Wonder Dogs didn't make it out alive. One was hit by a car,
Oh my god.
and the other died of heat exhaustion. They clearly needed a dog union because they should have been getting water out there.
Wow. the chances of that. So after a 10-month manhunt for Gene Leroy Hart, he was eventually found on April 6, 1978, hiding in a residence in Cookson Hills, Oklahoma. The team of OBSI agents that arrested him at this residence, it was only 45 miles from Camp Scott. And because Gene was from this area, he had a lot of supporters, which is just terrifying because he's already committed previous crimes that are just horrible.
I guess if you if you're just getting accused of this one murder and maybe you're a
Right.
stand-up guy, maybe you
Yeah.
have some people who are well, there's no chance he did that.
Right.
But literally escaped convict,
Yes.
arrested for rape and murder. That doesn't feel like
Yeah.
somewhere where we're he definitely didn't do it.
Yeah.
This part
Convicted
is
criminal.
unnecessary, Yeah.
His trial took several days and gained local and national attention. Testimony in the trial said that he was basically their only suspect very early on, and throughout his entire trial, he was the only one. He was the only suspect. And not previously disclosed was before the summer camp had opened, there had been multiple threats against the camp, whether it was against, I'm gonna harm the children, the camp is in trouble, and no one ever reported this.
I wonder that if you were gonna take your job at this summer camp, you would have a little bit of knowledge of this, and
Right.
especially hearing the screams of the little girls. Like, you would go
Yeah,
investigate.
like maybe tell the counselors, like, we've had some threats. Take
Keep a
things
close eye
extra
out.
precautious.
So he was walking the camp even before it opened, and
Yeah.
then he was in the cave, like near the camp, just waiting for the first night.
That's what it seems like. And during the trial, they connected the evidence between what was in the caves and what was at the crime scene, like the Tulsa World newspaper, the rope, the women's eyeglasses, the duct tape, and the photographs all led investigators to believe that they had a pretty solid case against Hart. At the end of March 1979, after a brief deliberation by the jury, he was acquitted of these murders.
He was acquitted.
Acquitted.
So, not guilty.
Yeah.
Which is pretty wild because even though he was like the only person they looked into, it still sounds like a pretty good.
Right. Like the evidence was there.
Pretty solid case.
But maybe it was all the holes in the investigation between like the sheriff's office and the OBSI. It made it not seem that.
Especially when it's like a jury from the county who've probably been watching this case.
Right.
People who knew these girls, and when you see that these people have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't
how
trust
can
them.
you? Yeah. How can you convict someone?
So he returned to prison to serve out the remainder of his 305-year sentence, even though he was acquitted of these specific murders. And a couple months later, he died of a heart attack in prison. And Camp Scott would never open again, and speculation and theories would surround these murders for years. 45 years later, there are questions as to whether he was the killer, and if he was, if he acted alone. And in 1996, Ted LaTurner, a private investigator, looked into this case and got permission for a grand jury from Mays County. He claims that he had a witness who named 3 suspects, none of which were Hart. And this witness, who was never named, would later redact their statement, and it was discredited by authorities. And despite the rumors, Hart is still the only person who was ever charged with this crime. And in 1989, the OSBI did testing on a DNA sample, and authorities were unable to exclude him after the DNA evidence, and it also never led to anyone else.
Like it couldn't like specifically point to him, but
No.
none of the characteristics will now.
Right.
Yeah.
And the OBSI at one point had considered closing this case, and they were waiting on word from like the families and Sheriff Mike Reed to make a decision on whether or not they thought they could close it. And they never did. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation still leaves this case open, and all of their evidence never excluded Hart, but never pointed to
Like-
anyone else either.
I don't know how. I don't know how the camp would ever reopen.
Yeah, not after
Yeah.
something like that.
And all those like tents are still there.
Right, the camp is just completely overgrown.
Yeah.
I think it's Michelle Heather Goose's mom who is like the one who's still pushing for them to. I think it's like she's the one who talks to Mike Reed, the new sheriff of Mays
Yeah.
County, to like still solve this case.
Honestly,
Yeah.
yeah. They could. We had like DNA evidence is so much better. Maybe we could like.
Right, just new testing and
Yeah.
Since like 1989.
and after the other investigation was still like corrupt, maybe if we started over things could become more clear.
Yeah.
And that's all we have for now on the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. Thank you for listening.
Dun dun.